Federal law allows citizens to reproduce, distribute, or exhibit portions of copyrighted motion pictures, videotapes, or video discs under certain circumstances without authorization of the copyright holder. This is called fair use and is allowed for purposes of criticism, news reporting, teaching, and parody, which doesn't infringe of copyright under 17 U.S.C. 107.
Oh, you guys aren't gonna believe this. So the more that we learn about the Ahmaud Arbery case, the weirder and weirder it gets, especially as people are digging into the stories and the pasts of the people surrounding his murder. From finding out that nothing was actually stolen from the home, and that the previous instances of people coming onto their property were not Ahmaud Arbery, according to the homeowner, to discovering the fact that the whole neighborhood was looking for a black guy, again, according to the homeowner, and that the only crime that anybody can remember being committed was the loss of some tools from the back of somebody's truck, and the only police report made was in December by the McMichaels, to Roddy, the man who filmed the incident, being mentioned in the police report as having attempted to cut Arbery off, which really paints a picture of Arbery being chased by the man that was filming him in a vehicle, only kind of to be corralled like some animal into running into the father-brother duo that was the McMichaels, one of whom was standing in the street armed, and Arbery, trying to escape, lost his life. But today I want to focus on Gregory McMichael, the father in this team, who has been pushed by the far right as somebody who is so law-abiding and upstanding because, hey, he was an ex-cop. Well, you're not going to believe this, but he wasn't a cop at all. Yeah, that is no slip of the tongue. Gregory McMichaels, he practiced as being a police officer, or should I say, pretended to be a police officer for 8 years straight. And then the DA's office, when it came out, helped to cover it up and then made him a detective? This is like a movie. Check it out.
Turning now to the investigation into the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery, the News4JAX I-team is digging deeper into the background of one of the men charged with murder. Gregory McMichael is a retired investigator for the Brunswick District Attorney's Office. The I-team discovered for 8 years of his time as an investigator, he was not a certified law enforcement officer. Now the policy agency that accredits who suspended him is speaking exclusively with News4JAX I-team investigator Kelly Wiley about what this means.
So for 8 years, Gregory McMichaels was playing police officer, but he wasn't a police officer. He didn't have the training to actually be a cop.
The executive director of Georgia Post says for 8 years of Greg McMichael's time here as chief investigator, he had as much authority to arrest someone as an average citizen. Multiple attorneys tell me the severity depends on how many cases he touched.
Do you hear what they're saying? He had as much power for 8 years, carrying a badge, pretending to be a cop, to arrest people as I do, or as you do. Talk about some integrity. This is unbelievable. You literally can't make this stuff up.
One of the men seen in the bed of a truck is a former investigator for the Brunswick District Attorney's Office. Gregory McMichael has been the chief investigator under DA Jackie Johnson for more than 20 years. Personnel records from 2014 show for at least 8 years, McMichael was acting as an investigator with no arrest powers due to a lack of training.
So they're going to get to the story, but it goes a little something like this. Gregory McMichael was practicing as a police officer for an extended period of time, almost a decade, 8 years. When it came out to some people who weren't crooked that he was doing this, then they stripped him of his badge, gun, and arrest powers, not that he ever had any, and quietly made him an official detective without arrest powers, because naturally you don't want it to get out that you had a police officer who wasn't legally a police officer.
The executive director of Georgia's Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, Mike Ayers, says it means he couldn't apply for orders of arrest warrants, search warrants, or conduct arrests under the color of the law.
He could not apply for arrest warrants, search warrants, or actually go through with arrests. What do you think he was doing during those 8 years, I ask you? Asking for arrest warrants, search warrants, and conducting arrests? That's right. A common citizen with no police powers was playing cop, and the whole county, including the DA's office, played it with him. They prosecuted goodness knows how many cases in that near decade, that 8 years.
Essentially, that individual at that point in time has no more authority to exercise restraint or control over another individual than any other citizen would have.
Attorney Gene Nichols says there are big implications for this revelation.
So what I think we're going to see, if we haven't already seen it already, is all of these defendants who, if he was involved in their case, all are going to have the right to come back into court and say, wait a minute, I want my case looked at again because he was involved with it and he had no lawful authority to do what he was doing. A lot of it's going to depend upon how much involvement he had in each one of the cases.
Not only did he have no lawful authority to hop in his pickup truck and grab a couple rifles and attempt to round up a black man, he also had no authority for 8 years of his career to engage in law enforcement. I am disgusted that his department tried to sweep this under the rug by quietly making him a detective with no arrest powers. Oh, cover your tracks. Cover your tracks. I think we're starting to get a clear indication of what's going on down south.
Letter in McMichael's personnel records state the office learned McMichael was behind on his training hours in April of 2014. The memo states he knew he was behind on hours, but recently discovered he had not had arrest powers since 2006. It had been 8 years.
Really? He knew he was behind on his hours. How are you a whole cop out here for 8 years? I know I didn't take my training courses, but I didn't realize I couldn't be a cop. Fool, you know that's how you become a cop. You know that's how you become a police officer. He's playing too many games. This man has no integrity. Oh, but it actually gets better than this. Better than them pretending they didn't know that their own officer wasn't accredited. Better than him pretending that he knew he hadn't taken all the classes, but he didn't know he wasn't no cop. Better than all of those things are the classes this fool missed.
A staff member wrote, until his arrest powers are restored, he has to hand over his badge, any identification cards identifying him as a deputy sheriff or district attorney's office investigator, and his department-issued firearm.
Wait, they took his gun? You mean this gun-toting, pickup-driving vigilante had his weapons taken away from him? Oh, you cannot make this up. This is literally a movie. We're living in a movie. We're locked in our homes. The government is running amok. People who are police officers aren't really police officers. The department strips them of their gun, but they're in the street conducting citizens' arrest with weapons? I have no words.
After the revelation, McMichael went before the Georgia Post Council and was granted a waiver, allowing him to stay on as a full-time investigator. His boss, DA Jackie Johnson, spoke in front of the council on his behalf.
The situation negatively impacted her office? Is this the same lady that said they were making a citizen's arrest and tried to sweep Ahmaud's murder under the rug until somebody called out her conflict of interest? Say it ain't so. I cannot believe all of these people who have a million excuses for these hillbillies. The whole office is corrupt. This corruption is deeper than Ahmaud. They're just dirty. And I recall a certain hillbilly lawyer who was trying to let this be known on national TV.
Why people would continue to put things out like that, to suggest that somehow he's in cahoots with whatever's been going on up on the 3rd floor at the courthouse with the DAs. Look, Greg McMichael worked for the DA's office for many years, and he was a Glenn County police officer before that.
Y'all don't know what's going on down here. The DA's office, before Cuomo cut him off.
Being in a letter that the situation had, quote, negatively impacted my office. Personnel files show McMichael for years was behind on governor-mandated training hours for de-escalation, community-oriented policing, and use of force.
Oh, I told you this was going to get worse. The classes that he was missing, you know, the ones he needed to be an actual police officer, were community-oriented policing, de-escalation, and use of force. Is this a joke? Are we being punked? Because I feel like I'm being punked.
These particular classes are critically important, especially when you look at terms like situations like de-escalation. How do you keep a situation from getting out of hand, which is potentially what you're looking at specifically in this situation. Now, at that point in time, they were not acting as law enforcement officers, but had he been a law enforcement officer at that time, de-escalation training certainly speaks to that whole issue.
Another interesting aspect to this is how it happened. Greg McMichael in his personnel file said that he had not known that he was without these arrest powers for this period of time. When we spoke to the executive director, he said at that period of time that we're talking about, it wasn't an uncommon issue.
I'm sorry. It wasn't an uncommon issue? It wasn't an uncommon issue for people to be carrying badges, arresting people, and engaging in law enforcement activities without actually being law enforcers? This wasn't an uncommon issue? I'm sorry, is there going to be a full investigation of this area? I mean, how many other police officers are walking around who weren't really cops, whose cases can be thrown out, who had no business arresting people? This is hardly minor. This is pretty outstandingly amazing. This is... I mean, what do you say? What do you say to this? This is crazy.
Agencies and officers themselves, they had the responsibility of keeping track of their training. Since Georgia Post has created a new system where they do yearly audits and they send out notification to officers as soon as they are now suspended. Now, we have reached out to the District Attorney Johnson's office again about this issue. Specifically, we were wondering how many cases this could potentially impact. We have yet to hear back. Reporting in Brunswick, Kelly Wiley, Channel 4, the local station.
What do you say to that? He wasn't a cop. And then the DA, she said it was very damaging to her office, so they quickly swept it under the rug and made him a detective. And this is a problem that was common. And they don't know how many cases were impacted in the near decade he was playing pretend-a-cop? You can't make this stuff up. And if you're a YouTuber or have a social media presence, blast this out from the rooftops. Gregory McMichael has zero integrity. He wasn't a cop, and his office is corrupt. Period. We don't even need to argue about this anymore. Community policing, de-escalation, and excessive use of force were the classes that he did not take that prevented him from being a police officer. You cannot make this up. I don't know. You guys tell me your opinion.